Okay, this video is for creating tubes and extruded long wire type objects. So ropes, cables, wire, yarn. I made these stands right here because I had a very specific long shape that I wanted to get. And I didn't really want to have to extrude a cylinder to get this specifically, even though it probably wouldn't be that hard for that object. But I'm going to be using the same method for both of these types of objects. So the way it pretty much works is I take a curve that I draw out, right? So you can see here, to get this knot, what I did was I used a curve and I drew out a curve and then kind of tied the curve with a knot, which can take surprisingly long amount of time to do, to get a curve to tie itself into a knot. And then what you do is you extrude a piece of geometry along that curve. Okay, and then what it does is it stitches together a long elongated object from that shape. So you can see this shape right here, this kind of flattened circle with these two pinches in the middle, was giving me this kind of chord right here that I have right there. See that? So it's essentially extruding it and following along that curve I drew out earlier, right? So let's start with the simpler one. I'm going to turn on the grid. Oh, my object's huge, so it's way over there. Let me just go ahead and look at it from the top view. Okay, and then I'm going to just draw a curve over here. So I'm going to access my curve. There's a couple options. You could draw out a curve. So if you have a specific shape that you're matching, or if you have a tablet, right, you could go like this, right? You can get an interesting shape, right? Or you could use the CV curve tool, or I don't know what it's actually called, EP curve tool. So you click the editing points and you can create a curve like this, right? And you press enter and it's done, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can create curves. And what I want to do is I'm going to, so let's take this, I'm going to modify center pivot, just so I can get the pivot point over here. I'm just going to separate these guys. So you'll notice if I right click on my object, I can go to the control vertex attribute, which is essentially the points that I can move around and edit to change the shape. So if I need to change or customize the shape, or I need to give it some depth, right? So maybe I need to make it like this, or like that, okay, or something like that, right? You know, I can get it into the pose I like, right? So let's keep it like that. I will say, if you're going to have something that's going to be animated, like a cord, like an extension cord like this, it's probably best to model it as straight as you possibly can, right? And so in that case, you know, you might not need to actually do this extrusion along a curve method, because it might just be as simple as, let me go ahead and duplicate this and move it over here, right? It might be as simple as me just taking this object, let's rotate it 90 degrees, and then extruding this in one direction, right? If I just need it to be straight, right, I can just do that and then just add a bunch of subdivisions, right? And that's probably super easy to do, or way easier to do than this method. But if you have a specific shape that you're trying to match, like, you know, a curved shape, or some students have something like this right here, tying these knots on these objects, right? Getting those shapes are going to be kind of difficult. Or this one right here is going to use the same kind of method I'm about to do here, but we're using a different curve tool or option. So instead of drawing out the curve, I'm actually taking some edge loops that I already have and then converting them to curves, so we can extrude this wire onto it. But anyways, so let's go ahead and exit out that. So these, in this case, those more complicated shapes are going to be harder to get. Okay, so if I have a curve, right, chances are that it's probably not super even, or it might be kind of gnarly like this, right? So if I need to clean this up, especially if I drew it out, what I can do is I can go to, or if you just need to make your curve a little bit smoother or have a little bit more detail, what you can do is go to curves, and you can click on rebuild. There's also some other options like smooth and straighten, which will change the shape of it. So if I click out straighten. It's going to completely straighten out my curve, or I can go to curves, smooth, and if I keep smoothing it out, I'm pressing G, it's just going to keep smoothing it, right? So that's probably one of the easiest ways to clean up the drawn curves. Let's just go ahead and start with one of these. So I'm going to create I need to essentially create the profile that my object is going to have, right? So to create this chord, I just kind of modeled out from like a cylinder this kind of shape right here, and then deleted the parts I didn't need. You just need like a really thin piece of geometry. You essentially just need a couple, like a single face, you know, in this shape. You don't even need thickness to it. But we'll take a look at that. So whatever object you have, you need to kind of consider what would the cross section of it be? If you cut it in half, what would it look like? Some braided rope, right? Braided rope. It's going to look something like this, right? So what I would need to do is I would need to figure out this cross section, cut it into cut it into pieces. So it's probably like 3 circles, right? And I'd want these 3 circles to start wrapping around each other. There's quite a few good tutorials out there for very specific objects you want to do, like Maya braided rope. You can just search for that, or wire or something like that, and you can see how people created specifically that object, and you can kind of get an idea of the object profile they start from. Okay, and I get 2 advertisements. I have to sit through this, and you guys have to watch me sit through this, which is great. There we go. Okay. So he's drawing out his curve. You can see he's starting from a sphere, or a cylinder, and then he's just getting these down to circles. And then what he's doing is he or she is, so it's like a 4 ropes, so they have 4 circles, right? Because each one's going to be extruded, and each one's going to make a tube or a rope. And then he's going to twist it so that as it goes along this surface, he can start rotating and twisting it so it braids around itself, right? So, you know, I can take a simple object like, let's go ahead and start from just a really simple cylinder, right? I could just do a sphere if I wanted to, or not a sphere, a flat circle. Okay, and so what's going to happen is I just need the cap, right? I don't need any of the other stuff. Just need a single cap. I want to set the pivot point for this cap to be the middle of the cap, right, of the circle object. Okay, now I'm going to change the shape of this. Let's duplicate this because I'm going to use one of these again, right? And so if I need to make a specific shape, right, let's turn on soft select, right? Let's say my object or my wire looks something like this, right? I don't know why. Maybe it just looks like that. This topology right here doesn't really matter because it's only going to show up on the end caps, and then I can delete the end caps later. So I'll just leave it for now. So the next step we need to do is we need to position our object to be extruded along our curve, okay? And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to turn on snap to curve, which is this one right here. And then when I click and drag, I'm going to click and drag it so it's more or less on top of the curve, and then I'll get to a point where it will actually start snapping to the curve, right? I'm going to move it all the way to the very beginning of the curve, and then I'm going to rotate it and orient it so that it's facing along the curve, okay? Next thing I'm going to do is I might actually just come in here and delete all these edges because I don't really need the interior edges, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face, select this object, or this curve, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on the extrude button. And you'll see what happens is it just jumps that second division all the way to the end, which is a good sign. You want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start increasing my subdivisions, right? I'm just going to increase this divisions, and we'll set this maybe like 60, right? And you can see now I have a, that profile or that shape that I created all the way following that curve, okay? There's some other settings we can change on it. If we go to the poly extrude face, there's some twist options, so we can get it to twist around. So let's say I want this to twist like 600 degrees, maybe like 1,000. Let's do 3,000. right? So that's how you can start getting that braided rope if I was making this out of multiple pieces, right? Right now I'm just getting like a weird twisty Twizzler kind of shape, but you know, it's working. And then let's take a look at some of the other settings. Taper, which is going to bloat or thin it out as it goes along the curve, right? So if you have like a hair or a whip or something like that, you can do that. Thickness is just going to essentially extrude it or move it along the curve. I'm not sure exactly when you would want to use it, but maybe if you made a loose knot or something like that, you could use this to kind of tighten the knot. And yeah, so that's pretty much the basics of it, right? If I wanted to create the braided rope, right, I might go grab this. Let's turn off snap to curve, right? Maybe I'll snap this to right here, and then move it up until it's just touching it, and then I'll duplicate, and then move this one over to the other side. Okay, then I'll combine these objects together, mesh combine, and then what I'll do is I'll just do modify center pivot, so the pivot of it's in the middle, more or less, and let's just move it. I'm not getting these actually perfectly symmetrical across, but I'll just do it like that, and let's go ahead and move it. We'll turn on snap to curve, and we're going to move it to the curve. See, once I get it over the curve and then push it again, it will start snapping. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it so it's oriented down the curve. And same thing, I'm just going to delete these edges because it makes it easier for me to select the faces. So I'll delete those edges. I'll just select these three faces, select this object, and then I'll go ahead and extrude it along the object. Okay, and then same thing, just go ahead and increase the subdivisions to a higher number. And then what I can do is I can go ahead and start twisting it. Set this to like 8,000, too high, 3,000, and that's looking pretty decent, right? And I probably would want to start tweaking and modifying the actual shape, right? So instead of having these kind of like separated like that, what I might want to do is I might want to have them intersect a little bit. And you can see it's not great all places, right? So there's some areas where it turns like a corner really quickly, and that could be caused by the topology. It could also be caused by the distribution of these control vertices. You can see these are kind of spaced out and these are tighter. So something I do if I want to try to combat that, let's stop, jump back until because I want to show something else as well in a second. Okay. So what I could do is I can grab my curve. I can click on rebuild, and then I want this to be uniform. And let's set this to a higher number because obviously that's not going to be enough. Click apply, right? And now it should have fairly evenly spaced spans. And I don't know if that's going to necessarily fix the problem we had earlier, but it's worth trying. So we'll take this, extrude, divisions, 70, twist, 3,000, smooth my object out, and it's a little less noticeable. I still feel like I'm getting it down at the end, so I probably would want to start tweaking that a little bit better. And then the other thing I could do is, oh, actually, what I was going to say was, so sometimes you might draw your curve backwards, and so you'll notice a different problem. I didn't draw my curve backwards, or I knew where the beginning of my curve was, or the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reverse this curve really quickly just to show you what it would look like if it was reversed. Because you can't tell just by visually looking at it. You would have to know how you drew the curve. So what I do is grab this. You'll see instead of it jumping all the way to the other end, it actually does this weird thing where it starts here and then it comes back to the beginning, right? And that's because the end of the curve is over here. So this extrude thing is going to look at your curve and try to figure out where the beginning is and where the end is, and if it's, it's going to move or extrude along the curve towards the end of your mesh, or of your curve. And so since this is the end, that's not going to work, right? So it's really simple to fix. All you have to do is select your curve, and then go reverse direction. And that should fix it. Okay, and then I'll just extrude here. And then I'm just going to increase my divisions by 70. Okay. So there's a lot of cool things you could do with this. If you have a curve that, or a shape you want to wrap around, like let's say you have like a rope or something that's hanging around here, or on your surface, and you can draw out a curve, right, which gets kind of tedious, or you can model it, which also gets kind of tedious sometimes. But you can do things like, if I wanted to have it wrap perfectly to right here, what I might do is I might go to edit mesh, or modify, and then what I'm going to do is convert polygon edges to curves, right? And so it's just going to make a new curve out of that. What I like to do is I like to also rebuild these curves. So just click on rebuild to get those evenly spaced, because I've found it doesn't always do that very well. And then what I'll do is let's go ahead and just isolate these two objects. Right. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to take this object here and I'm going to snap it to the curve. And let's go ahead and orient it. So let's orient it to this. And then I'll just rotate it, J. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is just like this, and then I'm going to go ahead and extrude. So the main problem I've personally had with this is that, let's go ahead and increase the divisions, is you don't really know where the beginning and the end of it is, right? You kind of have to guess. So there's a couple things you could do. One is, I get this and it's good for most of it, but not all of it, so I might just delete the parts that I don't like, right? Oop. So I might select these parts. Let's see this to here. Shift plus, or shift alligator bracket, right? And then I might just close this off and fix that, right? Because I started over there, but I didn't realize that my starting point was over here, right? Another thing you could do, and let's go ahead and unhide that. You can see it's perfectly hugging that. The other thing I could do when I created that curve is object mode. Is I could have just unselected one of my edges. And so what that does is when I go to modify, convert polygon edges to curve, right? And then isolate that, it's going to have a clear start and end, right? So I know exactly where it's going to start from, right? Or end at. And so that makes it easier to deal with that. Another thing you do is if you have really quick ropes you want to make, instead of doing that whole lining up, extrude, all that stuff, is to use Maya bonus tools. So Maya bonus tools, you can download them if you go to their page. Let's see here. So for some reason it's like on the Autodesk App Store, even though it's free. And so you just download it. It's a plugin, and so it's a plugin installer, so it's going to install a plugin for Maya. And so you'll just have to use the installer. Then if it doesn't pop up on your menu bar, if you reopen Maya, if it's still not showing up here, so I have it right here, then you'll have to probably load in the plugins, right? So you go to Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and then search for a category. It's one of the categories that's going to say bonus tools, right? And so I have one, Applications, Plugins, Maya bonus tools, and I'll just click load and auto load, right? And then that way it's going to load it into my scene. So bonus tools has a modeling curve to tube mesh, right? And so it'll actually take your geometry and generate a tube out of it, right? You'll have to figure out through that method how to actually make custom shapes for your tube, right? So it's just a very generic tube. So you probably would have to use the method I showed earlier if you want a really specific shape like my cord, or if you want to make like barbed wire or ribbon or something like that. Also, you noticed, let's go ahead and do that again. Modeling curve to tube. You'll notice there's some uneven spacing on some of these, and that is probably, in my experience, is due to the curve not being evenly distributed. So I'll just go ahead and rebuild that with uniform, apply, and let's go to bonus tools, modeling, curve to tube mesh, And let's go ahead and increase the subdivisions on that guy. So let's see, nope, not that one. Length subdivisions. And you can see now that's pretty even all the way across and easy to do. Okay. And then it's black because I'm looking at the inside of the faces for some reason. So I'm just going to go to mesh display, reverse to flip it, and there we go. And then I can stitch that if I need to. So there's a lot of different ways to make these curves, or tubes, or rope, or wire, or string, or yarn. Yeah, it's just a matter of figuring out exactly what you're trying to do and being smart about it.